All right, I know we're waiting for a couple more people, but we're running a little bit long. Apologize for that. So we'll get started here today. And I'll start with the territorial acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, land on which we are broadcasting from today, is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Chinootan people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. This land was promised to the Haudenosaunee Confederation of the Six Nations of the Grand River in October of 1784 to compensate them for the loss of their lands in upstate New York when they allied with the British, who were defeated in the American Revolutionary War. We recognize and acknowledge that this land was not land for the British nor any other government body to give or take away. Today, this land is home to Indigenous people from many distinct First Nations, as well as Métis and Inuit people. And a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we all show wisdom and compassion in our decisions. So council will move next to the disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Approval of the minutes, if someone could, moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Freeman to approve the minutes of November 18th council meeting. We have a consent motion for the Waterloo City Centre lease renewal. Oh, sorry, sorry, I'm trying to move too quickly to the end of the meeting. Sorry, all in favor of the approval of the minutes. That is carried unanimously. On to consent. Council, there is one item in consent. I believe there's some questions, so we're gonna pull that from consent. Do we have a motion to pull that from consent? Moved by Councillor Basak, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All in favor? Well, we don't have to do that? Sorry, I thought we had to move from consent. Okay, that's a regional thing. Okay, so there is the motion, or the agenda item is the Waterloo City Centre release renewal Uptown BIA. I understand you had a question, Councillor Basak?
Yeah, thanks to you, Mayor McCabe. My question is about the BIA lease renewal, because we see the report, but we don't see the actual agreement. So my understanding is that it's important for the BIA to be, of course, uptown, but in particular at City Hall to both be accessible for formal meetings, but then also have some of those informal interactions that really move the city's and the BIA's work forward. And so what I'm curious about is the agreement itself and what the intent behind having them in the building is, and if they were ever to have to move, which hopefully they wouldn't, what would the process for that be, and is there any way in the agreement to really solidify their position within City Hall itself? Would there be any challenges to that? You see the line of questioning, just generally better understanding that, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Over to you, Kevin.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mayor, Councillor Basak. So, yeah, I'll just start by saying that the BIA is a extremely valued partner and long-standing tenant at City Hall. I believe they've been in the building for the last 25 years, and so we certainly have, do not anticipate that changing with this lease renewal. I think it's just, the other piece we just want to highlight is there are ongoing, space allocation pressures at City Hall as, we continue to grow. And sometimes those factors are beyond our control. And so it's been the practice to build in language within lease renewals just around, should an operational need arise, that we would have the ability to work collaboratively with the tenant to relocate them if necessary. And so that language is in the lease here. But again, we have no immediate plans to do so. And so what we would put into the lease around that particular clause is, we could just formalize the collaborative nature in which that may, if that situation ever arose, how that would look. And that would include things such as a reasonable notice period, say 6 months or so, as well as having to receive consent or agreement from the tenant should that scenario arise to have to relocate them for operational reasons. So, that's that. Hopefully that addresses your question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I guess, what if the tenant didn't agree, if that's part of the clause?
Yeah, so again, the way that the clause would be written is we would have to have their agreement. So it would not be a unilateral decision. It would be something that we would work collaboratively with the tenant on. And I feel confident we could do that jointly if we had to.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. It sounds like this need would hopefully never arise to have to move the BIA from City Hall, and that there are strong mechanisms in place to work through that should that operational need arise. So thanks for that.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about this? Okay, moved, but we'll move to, we'll move this, moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Kevin, and thanks for your question, Councillor Vasek. So moving on to staff reports, we have the Housing Accelerator Fund Community Planning Permit System Initiative, Draft Community Planning Permit Bylaw, and Complementary Urban Design Guidelines. We have Tanya Kurek here, one of our planners, senior planners. Thanks for joining us today, and she has a presentation. Over to you, Tanya.
Good afternoon, Council, members of CMT, staff, public joining us in person and virtually. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to provide an update about Housing Accelerator Fund Grant Initiative number 7, which focuses on implementing a community planning permit system in the Uptown Primary Node, as well as the Herb Street Corridor, in order to help streamline development approvals with the hopes of getting more units to market faster. As the report notes, recently we released the draft community planning permit bylaw and draft urban design guidelines on the Engage project page, and we are really looking forward to kicking off engagement in the new year. For those who have had an opportunity to look at the bylaw, you will note that it's very similar to our existing zoning bylaw. And the reason for that is it has carried over those zoning regulations, noting that we, a couple of years ago, implemented an updated zoning bylaw. But with the community planning permit system, we are looking to enable a whole bunch of benefits, as has been noted in the report. And to help us advance this initiative, we are very lucky to be working with some great consultants who are really leaders in the space in terms of the development of community planning permit systems in Ontario. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to David Riley, who is partner at SGL Planning and Design, Justine Giancola, who's partner at Dillon Consulting, as well as Catherine J., partner at SGL Planning and Design, who is the head of urban design. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to David.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome, David and team.
Thank you very much, Council, and very happy to be here today. So we're here to talk about the Community Planning Permit System project, and it's exciting. It's a lot to cover off in this short presentation, but there is some great resources available online in terms of the background study that we had done for the city. There's a session that we did in June that was a public consultation session that was recorded. A lot of great information there, so we'll go there. So I guess I'm controlling this slide here. So the purpose of the project is really to create a community planning permit bylaw for the city. And this would apply to 2 strategic growth areas. I'm just going to skip right ahead to that slide here. But these are the study areas. So we've got Uptown Primary Node, which is the city's focal point for growth, where we are right now. And then we've got the Herb Street Corridor. So that extends west from Uptown almost all the way to Iron Needles Boulevard, and then a little bit on the east side of Uptown to Weber. Importantly, earlier this month, Council adopted OPA 58, which included updated CPPS policies. And that is what's needed to enable the city to undertake a CPP bylaw and to implement it. So what we're talking about here in terms of project objectives, and I won't read the slide in hopes of saving some time here, but really the 4 key themes are housing diversity, urban design, streamlining development approvals, and sustainability. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those things. And in terms of where we're at in the process, there is a slide at the end that I will touch on here, but we're in phase 2, but it's really kind of the first public phase. We've drafted a draft CPP bylaw and urban design guidelines that are out there. We've got a lot of time left between now and the spring of 2026, where there's going to be plenty of opportunities for engagement. So what is a community planning permit system? And this is a big question because it is something that is just, although it's not a new tool, it's been around for a while, it's just gaining traction now. What it is, it's a simplified way to think about it is by looking at this graphic. It's a land use planning tool enabled by the Ontario Planning Act that really combines and streamlines development approvals by combining multiple planning processes. So zoning bylaws, site plan control, and minor variance applications. It also combines other processes, including site alteration and vegetation removal. That's one of the benefits of the tool. Essentially, it replaces a zoning bylaw. So where you have a CPP bylaw, you do not have a zoning bylaw. But a CPP bylaw is very much like a zoning bylaw in that it regulates land in a very similar way. But it also, one of the benefits is that it allows municipalities and gives them a mechanism to provide community benefits or require community benefits. And the term that we use when we talk about community benefits in the CPP world is facilities, services, and matters. So you're going to hear me talk a little bit about that as well. First and foremost, as I mentioned, it's very similar to a zoning bylaw. So on this slide, again, I won't really go through the details of it, but you've got on the left hand, the traditional process. So that's the status quo of today. We've got zoning bylaw, we've got site plan approval, we've got community planning, or minor variance applications. And on the right side, we've got the community planning permit process. As it relates to site plan, in a traditional process, site plan control is applicable to certain types of development, and we know that that has been limited recently by provincial legislative changes that have happened to the Planning Act. It's limited the scope of site plan applications with respect to site and building design, and also you can't use site plan approval to deal with applications with under 10 units. So even a small townhouse development wouldn't be subject to site plan control. However, under a community planning permit system, there's a broader definition of development. As I mentioned, it also includes site alteration, vegetation removal, and you can actually control all of those elements that were lost from the traditional planning process in site plan approval. You can still do all those things through a CPPS. And it applies to developments of any size, so including those that are 10 units or less. So that is a major benefit that we wanted to highlight here. Moving forward, because my time is running out here, but the process here, you can see the top half is the traditional process where we're at today versus the streamlined process of a community planning permit approval. So community planning permit process happens within a 45-day time frame. And then you move to building permit, as opposed to zoning, which can be easily 3 months, then site plan approval, 2 months or more, then maybe a minor variance application. So this is that streamlining piece. It's very similar to a zoning bylaw, as I mentioned. This is essentially more or less the table of contents of the CPP bylaw. As Tanya mentioned, it really is carrying over all of those existing zone provisions. We're very lucky in this municipality where we have a brand new zoning bylaw. So what we've been able to do was really focus the CPP bylaw by taking over all of those provisions and just changing the process around that. And I did want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. A CPP bylaw establishes permit classes. So you've got class 1 approvals, which are basically as of right developments. So that would be delegated to staff for approval. A class 2 is something where the bylaw establishes a threshold of a variation to certain standards. So maybe there's a 10% variation to a front yard setback. If it's within that class 2 threshold, that gets delegated to staff. If it's beyond that threshold, it becomes a Class 3 application that moves to council for approval. So that is a change, the delegation of approvals. So we've got about a minute and a half left. We've also got other parts of the tool which are discretionary uses. You got exemptions, so something like building a single detached dwelling that complies with all of the zoning provisions, or an addition that it complies to zoning provisions, or CPP precinct provisions, I should say. Those are the types of things that would be exempt from a CPP. You could just go right to building permit in that. We're not trying to create an additional process here. It's really variations that we're dealing with. It's really, more of the benefits here, but really getting at supporting those local priorities of housing diversity, affordable housing, transit supportive development, and urban design. And I just wanted to show a quick example of what a variation might look like, where you've got the table here. It looks very much like zoning tables in your zoning bylaw, but the last column on either table you look at is a Class 2 variation threshold. So lot frontage, 10%. What that means is anything over a 10% variation would be a Class 3 approval going to council versus below that going to staff. Facility service and matters. I don't have much time to talk about this, but this is the community benefits piece, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. And urban design guidelines too. And that's my time. I want to respect the timelines, but we're here for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm sure we have some questions, but thank you. Thank you for timekeeping yourself throughout that process. So council, questions? We'll start with Councillor Basak.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, thanks very much for that presentation. I didn't notice this in the report, but about the 10 units or less, where that is exempt in the traditional zoning, but now it's coming back in line here. So I was curious why that is, what's the rationale for it? And then also, that seems like it might be one of the most time-intensive parts of the community planning process system, but I could be wrong on that. So just curious if that does add any pressures, even though I appreciate it's 45 days versus 100, but curious about that.
Sure, great question. That is one of the examples that we use. So we can't speak for the province in terms of what was behind those changes that they made, but what we believe on our team is that those changes were not made to the CPPS process because it's already an efficient process versus those other traditional planning tools that we use, site plan approval, separate from a zoning bylaw amendment application, are still separate processes that take time and they have their own approval timelines. In terms of having the ability for maybe a townhouse development that might be 9 units in size, and in the status quo is that that site plan no longer applies. But the reality is there are really a lot of important site plan issues that need to be addressed for a small townhouse development, like garbage location, landscaping, driveway access, that you can do through a CPPS application that you've lost the ability to do otherwise. So that's a really important tool, and yes, it does take time to deal with those things, but what we also have through the tool is the ability to require pre-consultation, set what's required and when you deem an application complete. So after you've received technical studies, for example, to make sure that you have what you need to evaluate and make a decision. And then if there's still if you're okay with it in principle, but there's still detailed to be addressed, the other benefit of this tool is that you can issue conditional approvals, which is something that we can't do right now when it comes to zoning bylaws. So we could say, we like this, we're going to issue your conditional approval, so check the 45-day time frame, subject to, it could be a detailed traffic study or a landscape plan that's submitted to the satisfaction of the city. Hopefully that answers some of the questions there.
Yeah, that's great. And the reason I asked is because in my ward, I mean, this goes just a tiny bit on my ward, like 3 houses, I think. But there was another informal that came that had townhouses, and it would be less than 10 units. And so that's the first time I'd ever known that that's the case about site plan. So I guess what I'm curious about in this process is, will you be reporting back to us about how that goes in particular? Because I think there'd be learnings from this corridor, this community planning permit system for other parts of the city. So I don't know, is that something that you might be reporting back on? In particular, this 10-unit thing, but there might be other things that I just haven't flagged.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Vassic, definitely that's something that we would be happy to do as staff, is once we implement the community planning permit system in Uptown and the Herb corridor, that we can monitor to see and to identify lessons learned. So definitely happy to commit to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Vassic, and thanks for your responses. Councillor Bodley.
Smooth, eh? Through you, Mayor McCabe, I have a couple of questions. I hate to harp on this. I don't want to get portrayed as the character guy, but in the draft guidelines that are on the screen here for the urban design guidelines, there's a reference in the Herb Street corridor that says respecting the character and contributing to the vitality of the existing adjacent neighborhoods. And so I'm hoping you might be able to elaborate within this context. What do we mean by respecting the character?
Good afternoon, through the mayor. So there's a couple of things happening with the guidelines. These were their set of guidelines to address the Uptown and Herb corridor in the intent that they are going to join the updated urban design manual that's citywide, which hasn't been completed yet. As part of that document, there's a section on character in there. So what we can do is look at whether or not in the interim we bring that section into these guidelines. We can also refer back to those guidelines in the meantime until such time as the citywide guidelines are updated. So there's a few things that we can look at to address that so that it's clear what the intent of character is, not only in the area that the guidelines are referring to, but the surrounding context as well. So.
That sounds great. Within this particular document, though, how do you define character through the lens of what you've proposed here in this document?
With regards to what's existing in the corridor, so there's a few things that we can clarify with regards to so both existing and future. So it does get a little tricky, but there's a number of key elements that we can look at as far as streetscape elements, built form elements. We can look at setbacks, landscape design, public spaces, those kinds of things. And we can put additional commentary in this document if that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And one other question, if I may?
Sure, I was just going to say the term, the character of a neighborhood, I wasn't sure exactly where you're going with that, but that is something that has been sort of a problematic phrase with planning development. So I think maybe adding some more specificity or explanation would be helpul.
We can also look at using a different term. I know character, it does sometimes cause issues. So we can look at a different term. Sometimes we use something like sense of place, or we can look at just changing that terminology so that it's not so problematic.
I mean, I think we can leave it with you, but I think sense of place certainly sounds personally better than character, because as I said, I mean, you would well know how many times people kind of argue about such and such a development changing the character of their neighborhood. So yeah, I think that would be helpful. Councillor Bale, you had another question?
I know every time I've been referred to as a character, it's never been a good thing.
Different context.
Through you, Mayor. The other question is around, in these urban design guidelines, there's a reference to providing parklets, which often take the place of parking spots, et cetera, using them for public space. And I'm really excited to see that, because it almost feels like we're moving from a few years ago with COVID, we were allowing businesses in the uptown to take over patio space and to sort of animate the street better, to this almost through zoning, not just allowing it, but sort of encouraging it, or possibly even collaborating with those businesses to make it happen. And so I'm curious, as we move forward here on the next steps, because I have anecdotally heard that there are challenges for some businesses in getting these permits, especially those businesses that are not serving alcohol or just looking to put out, tables and books and things like that, that it's been challenging sometimes to do. And so I'm interested, as we move forward here and these are adopted, how do we ensure that this zoning principle sort of permeates throughout the corporation, so that again, we're not just allowing businesses to do this, but actively encouraging them and partnering and collaborating with them?
All great points. And so we infused this idea into the guidelines so that we could test it, for lack of a better term, through engagement and figuring out how it could be implemented, and see if it could actually be streamlined and work better for those that want to participate. So that'll be something that we'll be bringing forward as part of the engagement, to figure out if it can actually work in an efficient manner.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Thank you very much for the presentation and for the work that you've done to date. I apologize, I've got a cold, so hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm really excited to see these coming along, and being one of the councillors on the west side of the city, this is awesome. But I do have a couple questions with it. I like the concept that we're moving toward a minor node, which does give some more flexibility, especially on the Herb Street side of my ward. When you're doing the consultation, how are we going to make sure that the residents and the businesses that are in the west side of the city are actually coming forward? Because typically when we talk about urban design guidelines, everybody's thinking the core, which is important, but now that we're moving this further to being inclusionary across the city, how are we going to make sure we get those voices there?
Through the chair to Councillor Hanmer. So as part of our engagement strategy, the goal is to send a letter to all the property owners in the area, as well as 120 meters surrounding, subject to the Canada Post strike issue being resolved, in order to bring about information, in addition using the city's social media channels, committees of councils, and other avenues we have to encourage as much engagement as possible, including with other stakeholders, neighborhood associations, the development industry, businesses, and so on and so forth. So we have what we feel is a robust engagement strategy, but it all goes to say is we're going to use as many tools as we can to try and get as many people to engage in this process. Thank you.
Tanya, thank you. I'm glad to hear that part about the neighborhood associations and the home associations, because they're very active in the wards on that side. And also more practically thinking there'll be lots of activities happening between now and March that are natural gatherings for the public to be at, that would be important too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. And yeah, our own social media networks around council were pretty important in terms of promoting this. Other questions from councillors around this? Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I'm curious, specifically about how this would potentially impact the work of the Committee of Adjustment, and if you could just comment on that briefly.
Through Madam Mayor, so what's important to remember is that the Committee of Adjustment is dealing with minor variance applications across the whole city, and consent applications. This doesn't replace or have anything to do with land division or consent applications. That's not going to change for the Committee of Adjustment. But for any application that comes through where it would be typically a minor variance application within the geography of the CPP bylaw, so Uptown or the Urb Corridor, the applications would no longer go to the Committee of Adjustment. They would go to either, depending on where they fall, in terms of the class thresholds that I was explaining, it would either be delegated to staff for approval, or if it was over that established threshold, it would be sent to council for approval. And so that's going to be a really important part of the consultations, that we get those thresholds right. Different municipalities are playing around with percentages versus absolute numbers. What do we want to be more flexible about versus not? So that's the kind of feedback that we're really looking for throughout this process from everyone, from the public, from the city, from all stakeholders, developers. So it will change the Committee of Adjustment. If this was a citywide bylaw, there would be much of a bigger change, but it will change a little bit, the rule.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do have a follow-up, thank you. So that sort of leads into my next question, which has to do with infill development, which can be particularly painful for those residents who are adjacent to it. And what might feel like a small threshold within a development process, if the context of the building typology is really different within that adjacency, it can feel not minor. I guess this is my point. So I'm curious, during the proposed engagement strategy, whether you'll make time to discuss how that happens, because it's, as proposed, it looks like, most of this work happens in the lead up, in the preparation for the community permitting planning system, like the lead up to the application, as I'm imagining an infill development. So I would imagine that there's, this work that happens up front, but then, part of the important aspect of community engagement at the Committee of Adjustment level is that some of those thresholds are actually presented to the committee, where maybe the planner associated with the file or even members of the Committee of Adjustment might not have the familiarity of that site-specific context to the same degree that the community does. So I'm just thinking about that and how the engagement process will unfold to try to capture that feedback, because I think certainly in Uptown and Ward 7, we've experienced a lot of this with infill development over the last period. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to that engagement process and how you might get to a decision about, whether it's thresholds or something more specific. Thanks.
Is this on? Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor, thank you for that question. Excellent question. So when you're using a community planning permit system, the bylaw itself does establish the thresholds of kind of what a standard is, where potential variations could be considered, any conditions or criteria that go with those variations, and then again, the threshold for what needs to go to council. And so in the bylaw itself, so unlike a Committee of Adjustments minor variance, which has provincial established criteria that need to be used in terms of the 4 tests, in this case, the bylaw itself establishes what do you care about as a community, and what do you want to use in terms of criteria to assess whether something is in fact minor. There's a lot of everyone has lots of opinions of what's minor. So in reading the bylaw, 1B6.1 has a list of criteria specific to the city of Waterloo, putting something forward to say, how can we assess whether a variation might be appropriate in one circumstance versus another. And I highlight the specific provision because, again, we'd love your thoughts and perspectives. If we're missing something or if there's something else that we need to be considering, please do review those specifically. The other thing to be aware of is the bylaw itself, while the legislation doesn't have any minimum notice requirements at all, the bylaw itself can introduce notice provisions within the community. And I'm just going to get you the exact reference. And the notice provisions are outlined in 1B12. And then there's also a table, sorry, it's just. And table 1A indicates the various different classes and notice requirements. And so right now, if the draft bylaw does have a note that if something does fall within either the standard itself or within that council variation, which is established in the bylaw, that there aren't specific notice requirements. But if something is going beyond that standard, we've outlined a mail out to residents within 120 meters of the subject property, staff to post notifications on the city's website, and on-site signage to be included. And there would be an opportunity for for staff to take delegations if you so choose. So again, wanted to highlight those specific areas because, again, would love any thoughts and perspectives from council and the community on these, but unlike the minor variance process, which is established by the province and you're held to criteria identified by someone else, you actually can identify here, what are the things that matter and how do we want it, where do we want to consider variation and where do we want to hold tight on a standard because it fundamentally matters to this community.
Thank you very much. Other questions from council? Seeing none, just a couple of quick ones from me. I noted that in the report where it says next steps, and I know this is probably pretty picky, and this is like the start of the consultation process, but it indicates it will also support important local objectives such as, and there's a few things listed there, but I was curious why it didn't include employment, green space. I know it says high quality sustainable design, but I think that's different from green space. So you don't actually have to answer that. I'm just noting that green space is something we hear a lot about from the community, particularly because Waterloo is intensifying and we've committed to holding our countryside boundaries in that. So green space is something that's important, but employment is as well, and the mixed use neighborhoods and things like that. So I think that's something that we just want to make sure that that's included. And the other thing I would just say, and I know we're talking a lot about communications and consultation and that, but mostly personally what I hear from people prior to being elected, but certainly before it, it's like people generally have this sense of, oh, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know you could do that. I don't know, this kind of stuff. So I think it just really behooves us to really be as robust with this consultation as possible. And I know Carrie, certainly our Director of Communications, hears this, as well. But mostly people kind of don't have a sense, or they don't realize what's happening in their communities until it's well into the process. So if there's a way you can figure that out through this process, that would be really great, because it's not just Waterloo. I think it's probably a common challenge across every municipality in the country, or maybe the world. But those are just a couple comments from me. But seeing no other questions or comments from council, thank you for the report, and I look forward to the consultation. I think again that's really going to be critical, and look forward to doing what we can around this horseshoe to let people understand what's coming and where they can weigh in and what we're actually aiming to do here. So there's two recommendations attached to this, and I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All in favor? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thanks very much for your work on this.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing more. Okay, the next item is the 2024 Get Ready Plan, which is much anticipated, and we welcome Divya Handa to present with a presentation. So with no further ado, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Divya.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Council. So the Ready team is very excited to share with you the final version of the City of Waterloo's first ever Reconciliation, Equity, Accessibility, Diversity, and Inclusion Plan, known as the Get Ready Plan. Council may recall that the Ready team previously brought forward the initial draft of this plan for Council's awareness on September 23rd, 2024. At that time, Council provided important feedback and suggestions for consideration, and those have now been incorporated. Today, we are seeking Council's approval to adopt the plan as presented, and following approval, the Ready team will work in collaboration with the communications team to launch the Get Ready plan for community awareness in early 2025. To briefly provide a little bit of a background, in 2021, Council formally approved the establishment of the Reconciliation, Equity, Accessibility, Diversity, Inclusion, READY team in response to calls for change at the systems level from communities across Waterloo, which were then and continue today to be focused on reconciliation, anti-racism, accessibility, and equity needs and disparities in the Waterloo community. These calls became particularly evident through several key events and movements. So, for example, the local Black Lives Matter movement gained momentum after the tragic murder of George Floyd, which highlighted the urgent need for racial justice and systemic change across society at large. There was also the Land Back encampment at Waterloo Park, which underscored the call for reconciliation and respect for Indigenous rights. Community engagement during the recent Waterloo Strategic Plan development also highlighted the desire from communities to have more READY initiatives throughout the city. In thoughtful response, the READY team was created and tasked to weave the principles of reconciliation, equity, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion into the fabric of our city's operations. This includes developing and implementing policies, practices, and programs, and adapting service delivery to reflect these values. One of the first significant steps to achieving this task is to develop the Get Ready Plan, which is a strategic guiding tool that sets a comprehensive framework for advancing reconciliation and guiding the City of Waterloo to become more equitable, inclusive, and accessible for everyone. As part of the work to develop the Get Ready Plan, various engagement efforts were undertaken internally and externally. These have been captured in the methodology section of the appendix of the Get Ready Plan. And through these efforts, several key themes began to emerge. So for example, we heard a strong need to improve the city's relations with Indigenous communities in Waterloo region so that we could advance reconciliation. Another theme emphasized enhancing the sense of belonging for community members, and this included things like increasing affordable and accessible spaces and programming that are barrier-free. There was a significant focus on making our public spaces more accessible, and recommendations included better snow removal, adding universal accessible change rooms and washrooms, expanding parking for individuals with disabilities, and creating sensory-friendly environments. Citing concerns about discrimination and harassment, especially street harassment, community members also shared a preference for restorative justice approaches and calls for staff training in cultural sensitivity and trauma-informed practices. There was also a call for equal opportunity and access to resources, particularly for equity-denied individuals in employment. And both staff and community recognized the need to refine engagement strategies, suggesting more streamlined and collaborative processes. There were calls for increased diversity within the city's staff and leadership, and in particular in gender, disability, and racial representation, and in particular in higher paying positions. And of interesting note, many of these findings were reflected in and expanded upon in our 2024 staff census and survey results. So that's to say that these themes were reflected by members of staff as well. So through careful analysis of the themes and findings and iterative community and staff engagement opportunities, key priority areas were then identified that spotlight where the city can make a significant impact given our current resources and capacity. So the READY team and consultants Taylor Newberry Consulting presented that draft of the Get Ready Plan to Council on September 23rd. And additional considerations were then provided by Council that have since been embedded into the plan. So the priority areas and their composite goals will show on the following slides, and updates that have been made based on the feedback we've received from Council and from community are indicated in red color font. So Priority Area 1 continues to focus on improving the relations of our city with Indigenous communities and leaders to foster reconciliation. Under this priority area, the city will focus on long-term goals that include increasing staff education and public awareness, building relationships with local Indigenous communities, celebrating and supporting Indigenous cultures, and moving towards developing a separate reconciliation strategy and an implementation plan that will address the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Girls Calls to Justice, and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Priority Area 2 will focus on enhancing the built environment through the development of funding plans for accessibility upgrades to interior and exterior public spaces. Following feedback from Council in September, we've amended Goal 3 to better reflect the broad spectrum of needs within the disability community, including diverse and complex needs of individuals with neurodivergent experiences. Priority Area 3 will focus on prioritizing a culture of belonging throughout the city. So this includes providing free or low-cost, accessible, age-friendly spaces for equity-denied community members, with an emphasis on those for the broader Indigenous community. In this priority area, the city will also aim to set targets to remove barriers that exist in municipal-led programming and will seek to partner with community organizations to expand programming to equity-denied groups. And in response to our changing social climate, in this priority area, the city will also focus on supporting region-wide efforts to reduce hate-based incidents. In recognition of the increasing reports of hate-motivated incidents within Waterloo region, the goal here is to encourage the city to collaborate with community partners, with those who have lived experience, and with allies to work towards solutions that reduce those instances of hate. As per our community and staff engagement consultations, our internal and external communities would like to see the city become more diverse at all levels. So Priority Area 4 will apply a focused lens to the recruitment, retention and advancement, and retirement cycle to remove barriers for equity-denied groups wherever possible, as well as to increase diversity across management level positions. This priority area also intends to work with council and senior leadership to provide training on ready principles to all staff to help make the city more inclusive and welcoming to all. The fifth priority area will focus on expanding resources throughout the city of Waterloo, including expanding opportunities for employment for equity-denied community members, and continuing to focus efforts on providing more affordable and accessible housing options. We did add 2 goals to this priority area. So the first is to expand interpretation services in recognition of our rapidly growing diversity across the region. And the second is to recognize the unique experiences, challenges, and needs that may present when considering an aging population and its many preferences. Finally, Priority Area 6 focuses on accountability goals that will help ensure that the city meet all the other goals listed throughout the plan. Key actions within this area include developing an implementation plan that will help the city to track all progress being made within each priority area, and a measurement and monitoring framework that will attempt to measure the impact of the Get Ready plan over time. So, in conclusion, with the Get Ready plan, we really want to give voice to and reflect the lived experiences of our communities, internal and external. Our goal continues to be to lift up residents and each other. The Get Ready plan focuses largely on feedback that was captured through community engagement, and it sets a vision to acknowledge, to meet, and to ultimately address the challenges that community has shared with us through difficult conversations. The forthcoming implementation plan will capture and highlight the work and intentional efforts to embed Ready that staff are making possible across the city. Our intention is to annually update and share the implementation plan with community in order to support transparency and accountability to all residents. And further down the road, we would like to leverage those implementation plans to develop a measurement and monitoring framework, which will attempt to meaningfully report the impact of the city's efforts to adopt and embed Ready into the very way of our being and doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Divya. And I know you're standing here today, but I know that certainly Brian and Paulina and Amy, who's, I'm not sure, I don't see
Amy's
Amy.
over here.
Oh, okay. And Adam, and I feel like I'm missing some.
Fresh staff.
Sorry?
Freshta.
Fresha, sorry. I know a lot that all of you have put a lot of work into this, so thank you very much. So we'll turn it over to council for questions, and we'll start with Councillor Hanmer.
Just as I'm about to cough. Thank you, thank you, Mayor, through you. Divya, thank you very much for this. I was well anticipating after you came in September to see how far it would go with the input that you've gotten, and I love your phrase that it's aspirational and actionable. I would add to it, it's long overdue. So I certainly encourage us to keep moving forward with the items that you've identified. My question, though, is what do you think is the biggest risk with the plan in terms of implementation or being able to move forward?
Through the mayor, thank you, Councillor Hanmer. I think the biggest risk is our sociopolitical climate. We know that we are experiencing many different, I would say, experiences that lead to all kinds of adversities, whether that is internal, so to the experiences of staff, or that is external to the experiences of our community. And I always think, so ready work is really great work, but it's great work when everyone has their basic needs met. And so when people feel like they're really struggling to have their basic needs met, this becomes one additional layer that we don't have the time or the energy and sometimes the compassion for. And so I think as we see that folks generally are struggling to meet those basic needs, it becomes that much harder to be able to argue why we need to extend compassion and grace to everyone when we're all feeling like, but I'm struggling as well, so what about me? And so I see the largest risk being the discourse of how do we continue to extend that empathy and that sympathy to everyone else when we also feel like we're struggling. And I think a big part of that is how do we channel all of those feelings or that sense of hopelessness or defeat or loss or confusion into meaningful ways of having conversation, because I think the more that we speak to each other, not only is that great to uplift each other, but it also helps remind us that we're all in this together.
Thank you for your response to that. I agree, keeping it first and foremost in all the ways that we're thinking of things, and I certainly hope that the Ready team, and I know that the Ready team will help us keep it first and foremost in all the decisions that we're making. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Hanmer, and thank you for that response, Divya. It sounds like something that we could all take. Certainly, I could take to heart personally, as well as when you think about it, an organization as large and broad as the city. Councillor Vasek.
Thanks through you, Mayor McCabe. Thanks so much for the presentation and all your work to the Ready team. I just want to keep talking about what you just talked about, but my specific question is about the Ontario Human Rights Code. So when I first read it, I was surprised that it's listed as a guiding document, but it's not listed in the team's guiding principles. And I thought that was interesting because the Ontario Human Rights Code is something I think I've upheld as sort of like a gold standard for human rights and respect. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about its positioning in the plan.
Yes. Through the mayor to Councillor Vasek. I think that that's an excellent question, and I think it's one that we get, I would say, from time to time. I think lots of people wonder how the Ontario Human Rights Code situates within the Ready work. One of the reasons that the code is not listed as a guiding principle is that it is a legislative document that's been designed within a settler colonial framework to correct past harms. So the main reason for not including it as one of our guiding principles is that we have included the 7 grandfather teachings and the Haudenosaunee Great Law, and both of these have already incorporated human respect and human rights deep within them. That's what they're situated within. So when the Ready team chose their guiding principles, they chose that the approach to this work needs to come from a focus on humanity rather than through a colonial punitive system. And so it felt comfortable to make the choice that since the 7 grandfather teachings of the Haudenosaunee Great Law already situated as our principles, and since they center a people perspective to begin with, that the Human Rights Code did not need to be listed as well.
I just think that's so beautiful. And it's one, of course, we work within a Western colonial framework at the city, and there are specific legislative and like certain legal guidelines that we have to follow. And I also really love the opportunity to push against that where we can and integrate other models, Indigenous models of respect and human rights where we can. And I'm really curious where that's going to push us in the future. So it feels like a small thing, but it also feels monumental. So thanks for explaining that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vasek. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I'm going to continue to riff a little bit on Councillor Hanmer's question. She had talked about the risks. And what really stood out to me about this plan is that, you know, as one of the priority areas, we have build trust through systems of accountability. But it really seems to me like building trust is one of the most fundamental parts of the plan. So I'm curious about how you, you know, when you think about the different actions that are part of the plan, what strikes you as being really catalytic or strategic in those priority actions that you've identified that could really maybe open up the trust building, especially considering the comments you've made about the socio-political context? And then the second, I have a comment after that.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Wright. Yeah, I think that is an integral part of doing this work and doing this work well. Maybe what I will say is that I think because building trust is so critical to how well we can actually do this work and how far we can extend its reach, it's not even really so much the Get Ready plan. The Get Ready plan is reflective of what we've heard of the experiences of community, and it outlines the goals by which we attempt to meet community halfway. I would say it's on where we start to build trust is through that accountability mechanism of the implementation plan. So with the implementation plan, we get to go back to community time and time again to say, this is how far we've come on working on each of these goals in each of these priority areas. And with that, it becomes an opportunity to have that dialogue, to the question that Councillor Hanmer had asked, that dialogue with community to say, this is how far we've gotten. Are we headed in the right direction? Do we keep going? It's really important to the Ready team that we take our directives from community, that we don't impose our directives on community. And I think the more frequently we can come back and report honestly in that way and take that feedback and keep working on it and coming back, that's how we start to build trust over time. It is that example of transparency. And so I think if I have to point to the Get Ready plan as what is maybe the most integral part to building that, it is probably Priority Area 6, because Priority Area 6 sort of demands that we remain accountable to this plan in the long term. So it's really that sustainability piece that asks us, how are we looping back and returning to community? If this is a reflection of community, how are we continuing to make sure we understand that changing reflection and experience?
And just to follow up on that, I mean, what you need really is the support of future councils to continue this work in a sustainable fashion, which brings me to my comment, which is, you know, work towards more representative council is complicated. It's, you know, really requires participation from the community and fostering the conditions for people to step up to run for an elected position. And so I just want to tie that to the Association of Municipality, I always have trouble saying this, Association of Municipalities of Ontario's Healthy Democracy Project, because that is exactly what they're trying to foster all across the province. And they have a number of initiatives underway right now that, you know, coordinated with clerks' offices and with grassroots organizations. You know, they've got a database of democracy-based initiatives that you can go to look for, like a solutions database. So just want to put that on your radar, you know, for future context.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you so much, Divya and the Ready team. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Vasic was saying about the 7 grandfather teachings and how just that different lens for us to that's what we're working from is really encouraging and inspiring. But I actually just wanted to give a shout out to the whole team. As you know, obviously I'm your council representative, but I think that this document and the work that you've done is representative of your team and the strengths that each of you bring to this, and it is so reflective here in this work, and I really want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Are there other comments or questions from council? Seeing none, just a couple from me. I was really curious about, to get pretty granular, it said 21% of individuals in Waterloo region have a disability. I was under the impression it was like 13%, so that really jumped out at me as a significantly increased statistic. Is that sort of reflective of, I mean, I don't know what that's reflective of, but the last stat I think that I'd heard was 13%. So is it being like analyzed differently, or is there a higher rate of disability within Waterloo region? Or maybe the 13% is just wrong and old and out of date?
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe I will call on Amy to be able to provide more insight into this. I understand that stat comes from census, the census data, and so there is a likelihood that there is an increase given the proportionality increase in our population as well. But beyond that, perhaps I'll ask Amy to provide further.
Okay, thank you. It just really jumped out at me.
It could be that people are reporting more. It could also be that disability can happen to anyone at any time. So it could be reflective of long-term disability, but it could also include people that maybe are having episodic disability as well. But it does capture folks 15 years of age and older.
Thank you. Okay, that's helpful to reflect on. And just while you're there, part of when I was reading through this and thinking about, changes that may need to be made to our buildings and facilities and that, because some of our buildings are, they're set, right? And changing building design and stuff is very challenging in that. So is there a way, or have you thought about it, or are there recommendations around how we could adapt some of our buildings, particularly, that would make it more accessible, but in a quick, how we could get some quicker wins? Are there things we should be thinking about that increase the adaptability? I'm not sure if I'm being very clear, but what are, I'm thinking about the cost and the timing and how long some of these things take and the urgency behind some of it. Are there other ways we could look at our buildings and our facilities to adapt them more quickly? Maybe even temporary structures and things like that would kind of get us part of the way more quickly so that people can be welcomed into, whether it's parks or inside our facilities.
It's a complicated question.
Okay. Maybe you can report back on that. I don't know, because, I just worry that, the facility piece is so big and it's so challenging because, they're made of concrete and they're huge, they're structures that are not easily changed. So what can we kind of do to get there in a way that works for people, but also, like I said, gets them, so they can participate more fully, more quickly?
Sure. Facility design and management and Reddy will be bringing a report April-ish about the AODA funds, so we can talk about it then.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Hammer.
Just if I could add on Amy's behalf a little bit, through GRAC, it's a conversation that we have almost every single month when we're looking at reports that have come through from staff, because all of the municipalities are dealing with existing buildings. And so we are limited, but there are some creative solutions. So I look forward to the report that Amy and the team will bring back.
Okay, thank you. Creative solutions. That's a much quicker way for me to say all that I was trying to spit out. Thank you, Councillor Hanmer, that's helpful. And just, I was also curious about, it said under GRAC, that building upgrades may require collaboration by all orders of government. Like, is that, are you talking about funding there, or are you talking, or is this like, we need to all kind of set some kind of standards, or what exactly was that referring to?
Some of it's about funding, but I would suggest to you that the AODA and the building code don't offer great levels of accessibility for everyone, and so some adaptability is needed within those frameworks for sure.
Okay, yeah, well, the building code is a challenge, there's no question there. Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And then just more broadly, I'm curious about what you as the team, the READY team, has learned through this process from other municipalities. Are there any municipalities that we can look to say they're doing it really well and we can learn from them?
It's really exciting that I can increase the height of something. Thank you, Mayor. There are some municipalities that are also attempting to do their own version of reconciliation and EDI work. I think the changing context, our changing sociopolitical context makes it kind of challenging because we do have very unique jurisdictions in which we do this work. Our communities look vastly different. And the demographics of our community require really different approaches. So there are communities who do really good EDI work, but being able to take what they're doing and bring it to our community and have this expectation that it will transfer over really well can be quite challenging. I think when we are trying to study and understand and learn from municipalities who are doing this work in a good way, we do try and look at those municipalities who maybe reflect our sociodemographics and some of the challenges that we're experiencing. And so we do tend to look at sort of the GTA in Toronto or Vancouver and Montreal. But I think one of the bigger learning points that maybe I'm having and that we discuss as a team is how do we sort of look at the horizon of what these municipalities are actually dealing with. So it's not necessarily the way that they're responding today or what they're needing to respond today, but what are sort of the emerging issues that they're trying to anticipate dealing with, because those will eventually become ours as well. And so how do we proactively get ahead of the curve to just make sure that we are already setting in place the conditions that allow us to thrive, and so that hopefully we don't either get to that experience or that state, or that by the time that we get there, we've already built a strong foundation that allows us to succeed in those challenges. So in that way, it can sometimes be challenging because a lot of times municipalities are not open or eager to share some of those things that they're really struggling with. And so it does really require paying attention to kind of unique voices that are calling out municipalities for not doing something well or for doing something really, really well, and then to understand how that's showing up in the reconciliation or the EDI space of those municipalities. So I would say that it's a little bit of kind of Sherlock Holmes work and a little bit of puzzle making, but it is really trying to pay attention to the creative and unique ways in which municipalities are responding to changing sociodemographics.
Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. And certainly I know that our community is different from other communities, but it is always helpful to learn where we can from things, but thank you for that. And just a couple more questions for you, and then I had a question about the reconciliation piece. How is this connected to the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan?
Thank you, Mayor, for that question. So the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, it looks at wellness at the broader regional level, and so some of our goals will roll up into the work of the plan. In particular, we look at the initiatives that they're aiming to extend across the region and where those sort of align really well with us, where we can partner with the Community Safety and Wellbeing folks, or where we can either expand upon or grow upon their work. So a really great example is that Paulina, as the social justice advocate, sits on the Combating Hate working table, which is part of the community safety and well-being work. And so that is looking at how we can address the increased reporting and the increased incidence of hate motivated incidents across the region. So it's in great alignment with our goals and our work as well. And so in that way, we try and make sure that we're aligning, particularly for Priority Area 3, because it's around creating that sense of belonging. So aligning our work as much as we can. I would say that we've tried to do that with as many of the priority areas as we can. So for example, Priority Area 1 rolls into the work of the Reconciliation Action Partnership. And then Priority Area 3, where we can, we try and roll up into the community safety and well-being work.
Okay, that's really good to know about that collaboration, because we know that community groups work across the entire region and sometimes beyond it, and you know, people move across the region and work in different areas and live in different areas. So I think it's really important that we kind of think about it. There's, you know, work obviously that we need to do in Waterloo, but beyond. And just on the employment thing, I don't know if you are aware, but at the region, they've started this really interesting employment program through people who are on OW that's helping people find employment opportunities. It's started as a pilot project. We've just extended it. It's been really successful. I can tell you or share more about it later if you're interested.
Yes,
but it has been it's another sort of made in Waterloo region story, but it's proving to be quite successful. And then just a couple of questions about, I'm lucky I'm the chair, or the mayor, so I don't have to do just question one follow-up and move on, but taking liberties here. But just on reconciliation in particular, thank you, Brian, for providing those books today for us. That's really helpful and gives us some reading over the holidays, because hopefully we'll all have time to do that. I was just interested, it said on, I forget the page right now, but it says there's a separate action, in one of the paragraphs it said sorry, I've moved off that page. It says that there's a separate action plan needed for reconciliation, but then I don't think I saw in the recommendations to create a separate reconciliation plan. So I was just curious about why it was referenced in part of the document, but then not in the recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a very astute observation.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Divya.
The Reconciliation Strategy and Implementation Plan is a reflection of what we were asked to work on from the community, so from the Indigenous community through those consultation sessions that Brian hosted. We received feedback really loud and clear that we need to develop a reconciliation-specific strategy and implementation plan. As I mentioned, Priority Area 1 that looks at that development is meant to roll up into the work of the Regional Reconciliation Action Partnership. And so in order to make sure that we are aligned with RAP, the Reconciliation Action Partnership, with their strategy, which is called a Pathway Forward, we are moving in the direction of looking at the development of maybe a Waterloo-specific brief strategy, but one that really aligns well with RAP's larger regional strategy. And so the city will have specific initiatives that are in relation to the Waterloo community, but we will need to collaborate with the regional initiatives as well. And so essentially, RAP has set the pace of this work and they've developed the overarching strategy. And our aim is to implement their strategy over the next few years and then report back using our implementation plan.
Okay, that was going to be another question, is how is it aligned with RAP? And so thank you for answering that. And we're obviously really lucky to have Brian as the key lead for the Reconciliation Action Plan as well. So, okay, that's helpful to know, because obviously that's a really important piece of this work as well. I didn't want to lose that as well. And then my last question was, I'm just curious, because the city has taken some actions and we've moved things forward, but and it's kind of similar to the question I just asked about planning. It's like, were people aware of it? And this isn't like, about communications, because we know we can communicate to the whole, so many different ways, but I'm just curious if people knew that we had made some changes. Obviously, there's more work that we need to do, but were they aware for instance, of the sidewalk snow clearing, that we put more funding into that, and that we're, we've hired like Spotty, who's like with Kevin's team doing a lot of work on accessibility and things like that. Like, has the communities, has some of that resonated?
Thank you, Mayor. That's a little bit of a challenging question to answer. Through the consultation process, what we heard a lot of is what we could do better and experiences that were maybe more heavily negative. That's not to say it was all negative, but it is sometimes harder to understand how well those communications are received. I think, as is true for all of our work as municipality, those who actively are interested and pay attention will hear all the things that we're doing, and those who aren't, for various different reasons, aren't necessarily aware of all of the different pieces, all of the different moving pieces. And so I think it's a great question, because it does speak to how we're going to extend the reach of the implementation plan when we do go out in 2025 to say, here are all of the different things that we've done. And I'm really proud to be able to say that as a city, we have over 300 documented actions of how we're embedding Ready in our work. So that is vast and impressive and worth having a lot of pride in, but that doesn't always communicate clearly or well or in the way that is the most able to be received by our communities. And so I think that there is work for us to be able to do that and to do that better. And I think there's a lot of learning for us to get to that place as well. And again, I think that through the process of creating dialogue and continuously coming back to community, that will start to happen. I think that when the consultations were happening, particularly the consultations that happened this year that I was able to be a part of, we did not feel as a Ready team that it was the appropriate space to be sharing that we were doing X, Y, and Z, because we wanted the environment to be one in which community members and representatives were feeling comfortable saying you could do X, Y, or Z better. So there is also a lot of sorting of feedback between the discrepancy of what the city can actually do versus what the region would do, and being able to sort that. But we felt that this was not the appropriate venue or time at which we would provide that type of clarity. We think that we need to build a lot more trust and establish relationships before we can move to that level of dialogue.
Sure, and fair enough, and that's obviously a really good point. And I didn't intend it as like, but it's really, I'm curious about how much is kind of, how much they're aware of what we're doing, but it's kind of like the general public. It just seems like we do a lot, and it's not, but part of it's like, we want them to know that we've listened to them and heard them, and we're, diligently working. You said 300 actions, like we are working towards it, and I just, it's more just to like reassure them that, what they're saying to us, we've heard, we've felt, we're actioning it as where we can. So,
yes.
Thank you. And I guess just my final comment is this, is that, there's also a note in there about that council should reflect the community, and certainly we're aware of that as well. And, if there's people who are interested in learning about the elected side of this work, we're, I think, always happy to, we bring school kids in all the time, but if there's community groups that we can make arrangements with to come in and see the space, because I think it's really important for people to see the space, and then they can kind of maybe think of themselves being here either as a staff person or as a volunteer or as an elected official. So, if there's people that want to come here, and we can, happy to make arrangements on outside of the working day to bring them in and that kind of stuff. So hopefully the community is aware of that as well. But I guess, this is work, I kind of liken it a bit to the climate change work that's happening too. This isn't work that that has to happen just out of your 6 or 7 staff in the Ready team, because there's no way that you can do all this work. This is stuff that really has to be embedded across the whole organization in order to really be impactful and to move things forward. So, so thank you very much to you and your team, and to all the community groups who participated and spent time providing their input on this. We really, truly do appreciate it. So thank you very much. And we have a delegate here to speak about the Get Ready plan. welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for your patience this afternoon. But I don't know if you've been here before, but welcome. And Sarah Shafiq is the Director of Advocacy, Research, and Outreach with the Coalition of Muslim Women of Kitchener-Waterloo. So welcome this afternoon, and you have 10 minutes.
You, Mayor McCabe, and the esteemed council member. I'm not here to comment on the Get Ready plan. This is a different, a different presentation on Coalition of Muslim Women and the work we do.
Okay.
All good. So I'm grateful, really grateful for to be able to be here today, for the city of Waterloo's continued support for the Coalition of Muslim Women, and it's truly humbling to stand before you and reflect on how far we have come. What started as a modest initiative 14 years ago by a handful of visionary women has grown into a robust organization with 15 dedicated staff members devotedly delivering much-needed services to racialized and Muslim women, their families, and their communities, focusing on preventing and addressing gender-based violence and hate, racism, Islamophobia, xenophobia through culturally safe and responsive support services, diverse outreach, persistent advocacy, and our signature bridge building programs. CMW's uniqueness lies in its relentless upstream work to address the underlying causes of the issues hindering the social and economic inclusion of racialized and Muslim women and youth particularly. We are proud of our commitment and our contributions to the upstream work happening in our region, such as Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan to end chronic homelessness, etc. As much as I'm proud of our upstream work in crisis intervention services, I can't stop talking about the impact of CMW's work seen through countless success stories of women who have overcome systemic barriers to be leaders and youth leaders who are stepping up to make a difference. The innovativeness of our services is rooted in deep connections to the communities we serve. We listen and we act to remove the underlying issues impacting their lives every day. I would like to highlight two of our services: multilingual live chat services for newcomer and racialized women experiencing GBV provides critical support to those who might otherwise remain unheard and underserved due to language and cultural barriers. Our anti-hate services have documented hate and discrimination incidents in the Waterloo region since 2021 and provided direct supports to 100+ victims, helping them navigate their experiences with dignity and resilience. These services are not just first for our region, they've garnered national attention as models that other communities across Canada are looking to replicate. This tells us that the work we do is essential, not just here, but beyond. This critical work around anti-racism has been acknowledged by your esteemed council in October when Councillor Wright's motion was passed for the residents of Waterloo region to join the City of Waterloo staff and council in the work to oppose racism and hate and in fostering a sense of belonging for all community members. But today, I must share a challenge that threatens our ability to continue this important work. Despite our successes, CMW is facing a looming crisis, sustaining our services and retaining our staff. The systemic reliance on project-based funding presents a major obstacle. While these funds allow us to launch impactful initiatives, they fall short in ensuring the long-term viability of these equitable services. We need stable, sustainable funding to build on the success and strengths of our one-of-their-kind services in our region, retain staff with specialized skills, and ensure economic stability for the racialized women who are the backbone of these programs. The impact of losing these programs is not just operational, it's deeply personal. It's about the community members who face hate and discrimination and feel they have nowhere to go. It's about ensuring that racialized women are not just surviving, but thriving with stable jobs and opportunities that recognize their worth and contributions. Today, I'm here to ask for the City of Waterloo to play its role in sustaining CMW and its work by providing operational funding. I sincerely hope that the city will be a partner in creating a future where organizations and groups like ours can focus on delivering on mission, and where the equity-deserving organizations can build proudly culturally safe and responsive to the issues facing their communities to last until they are needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sorry, I was almost going to call you Fazia.
Fazia was supposed to be here, but we,
please send my best wishes to Fazia. It's been a while since I've seen
really
her.
appreciate it.
But thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Mayor, I actually have a couple of questions, if you'll grant me the time. Thank you so much for your presentation, and certainly the work that you do in the community. I think we're all very aware of all of the work that you do, and it really is fantastic. I do have a couple of questions. I'm wondering if you have a specific ask that you're looking for from the City of Waterloo, and are you visiting other municipalities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Through you, Mayor. We are visiting other municipalities as well, and this is really, we don't have a specific sort of number in mind, but considering operational funding, we can give an estimate and we can work on that. But the whole program, for example, AHS, the staff, the majority of the funding is for staffing. And so, one can get a general idea of how much that would come to, and then obviously operational costs are above that.
Thank you very much. Do you also receive any funding from grants? Community
Absolutely,
grants,
yeah.
for example?
Primarily, all of our programs are funded by various funding agencies. So it could be federal, it could be provincial, it could be foundations. And so majority are funded through grants, and we do our fundraising as well. So that is also a source of funding. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering then, Mayor, can I direct a question to staff, or would you like me to do that after council?
Well, let's just see if there's other questions of the delegate, and then we can. There's still time for questions to staff. Are there other questions of the delegate? Okay, seeing none, thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks for the work that through you to your staff team that's been recognized across Canada. And as we just heard from the Get Ready plan, we know there's as much as good work that's been happening by yourself and other community groups and staff at the city. We know there's more to do. So, but thank you for coming to talk to us and give us an update on your organization. So we'll go back to Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I'm just wondering if I can turn to staff, perhaps Jim or Tim, just to see if this is something that you could take back and talk to staff about.
Yeah, excuse me. Through you, oh my voice is gone. Through you, Mayor, on this one, I don't know what's happened. Yes, we could take this request back. We'd have to do a lot more collaboration with our finance team as well as the Ready team. Thank you. And determine exactly what the ask is and what the impacts would be to our to the needs of the group. And we probably would, if it's council okays, we would like to come back maybe in February for a report back to council on that matter.
Sorry, that sounds reasonable. I think Councillor Rowe, does it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. Did you have another question? No? Okay, Councillor Bassick.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your delegation. When you bring that back, can you give us also a sense, give council a sense of other organizations whom we may do something similar for, so we have an understanding of in the context of the whole city?
Impact, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so then, thank you very much. So we do have a recommendation in front of us, Council, specifically regarding the Get Ready plan. And it's to receive and provide a final approval for the report. So I'll look to Council. Councillor Wright is moving that. Councillor Rowe is seconding it. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Council. And thank you very much again to Divya, Brian, Amy, Paulina, Adam, and Freshka. And Councillor Bassick would like to.
I think we need a motion for
Oh my
staff to
gosh,
come back.
I don't know what is going on with me that I'm forgetting to, sorry, did I not call for? Oh, I forgot for the vote. I apologize. All in favor? No.
No,
we did that. Sorry, what are you saying?
we voted for the Get Ready plan. It passed unanimously. Great job, guys. And now I think we're voting for Councillor Rowe's motion to approve a report to
think
look
that-
into the Coalition of Muslim Women's financial
Oh,
ask
I think
of
that
us.
was just, I just took that as direction to staff.
Just direction, we
Yeah,
don't have to
that's
vote on
direction
that?
to staff. So,
Great.
yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I got totally confused there. Okay.
Sorry. I think staff feel differently, that we do need a motion. So let's just clarify before we move on.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor, I'll take that question. Councillor Vassick is right. Procedurally, when these types of items are considered by council, it's probably best that council refers them through a vote to staff, given there's a financial component to it.
Okay, all right. All right, then we will call for, that just seems curious to me because we don't actually have a financial component yet because we haven't had the report to consider. Is that really necessary or? Yeah, I'll just look to the clerk.
Through the mayor, typically if there's a direction to staff to undertake a significant, undertake some work, it's not really a dollar figure, then it's a good practice to have direction from council.
Okay, all right, so we'll then moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Bassick. The motion is to ask staff to do some investigative work to determine what community organizations receive funding and what potential recommendations there may be with respect specifically to the Coalition of Muslim Women. Does that work for you, Councillor Rowe, as a motion? Did you get that? Any, so questions of the motion, comments around that? I may not have worded it exactly perfectly, but Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, through you. I believe if I understood Councillor Vassick correctly, it's not the ones that we are currently funding. It's organizations that we may have to consider in the future that are providing services.
It was the first, but that is a great question. So we could add that.
Then I have a problem with adding that because that's sending the staff, I would believe, down a needle in a haystack. I'm not sure that they'd be able to do it to our satisfaction. So let's start with ours first, what we're funding now.
May I just clarify? The reason I think that it's important is because we get asks to council often, and this is a very important ask. We get many important asks. And so I just want to I don't know if we have other organizations who do similar work to Coalition of Muslim Women, or if this is going to set some sort of precedent of ask. And there's so much need, so I just really want to have an understanding of if we are already doing this. And I'm fine if we don't go ahead and look at who might ask us, that's fine.
I have a suggestion.
Just hold on to that. I mean, I'm just wondering if maybe we should just put the motion up on the screen so we actually make sure that we've got it wordsmithed properly. Can you do that, Rook? And then go ahead, Councillor.
So my suggestion was, Councillor Vassick, to you, that it's the principals, should we have asks like this that come, how do we handle them in the future? Staff, does that make sense? Then it's getting us ready should other things come forward. Okay.
Just give Rook, clerks, a couple of minutes here. And see, and
If I can, since this is a direction to staff, I don't think that you need to nail down the language precisely. I think it would probably actually be more beneficial to staff to leave it a little bit open. I think that staff understands roughly, but I mean, if there's a significant direction, but otherwise, I think staff understand that this is an operational ask, which we don't currently have a process for, and, you know, what could a potential process or principles look like, or if we anticipate future asks. So I
So,
think that's
I
what
guess-
Brooke has captured on the screen, but if there's anything significantly wrong with that, then we
I
can
just want to make
adjust it.
sure we're clear, so because use the language direction, but it's not just direction, it's a motion. So that is the motion.
That is the motion,
It's,
but
Yeah.
the motion is a direction to
Okay,
staff,
all
yeah,
right.
versus a decision.
Okay, so I know Councillor Councillor Rowe Councillor Hanmer and then Councillor Rowe.
I think there needs to be a second part to it, because there specifically was an ask or a direction to look into Coalition of Muslim Women and working with them on what might be their operational needs.
Yes, the similar nature is referring to Coalition for Muslim Women, but it should be explicitly written there. And then Councillor Rowe, did you have a comment or question?
Just one comment, as this was underneath a delegation that came within item B, the Get Ready Plan. I just wanted to clarify, and I think it's self-explanatory, but that is not attached to the Ready Plan.
Yeah, that's,
Through the mayor to Councillor Rowe, it was a request that came in around the similar time as this item was coming forward. So it was a placement on the agenda versus directly related.
okay. So there's the motion, council, that council directs staff to report back in February 2025 to determine what community organizations currently receive funding and the principles and process around future asks of a similar nature, and in particular, review the request for the Coalition of Women of KW. Councillor Bassick.
Thanks. I just think there's some concern about it being put here under the Get Ready, like just how it might be misinterpreted as a direction coming. I know.
I think-
It's just typing on the screen, so when Brooke has a moment, they can add another bullet. It's fine to be placed
Like-
here on the agenda.
But in the
I'm
minutes,
just-
it will be placed.
In the minutes itself, it's just that Brooke is trying to type it quickly for you to
Yeah.
consider it
And
versus formatting.
there's a lot going on. Totally,
Yeah.
totally.
So we'll just make sure to check that in the minutes when they are ready to make sure it's positioned to your satisfaction. So we do have this motion on the table moved by Councillor Rowe. Is Councillor Rowe and seconded by Councillor Bassick? Any other comments or questions, discussion? Okay, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. All right, so now we are moving on to item 10, which is a formal public meeting. This is a formal public meeting to consider item 10A, zoning bylaw amendment Z24-14, station area mixed use zone, the corporation of the city of Waterloo. Any persons who want further notification of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there is more than one binder, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on November 28th, 2024, and on November 27th, 2024, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on June 24th, 2024, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. And our planner, Tristan Debro, will now give a brief overview of the application.
Thank you very much, Mayor McCabe. Staff is bringing forward a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment to create a new station area mixed-use zone, which will be implemented on subject properties within the Research and Technology Park and Northfield Ion Station areas. So by way of a bit of background information, initial station area planning occurred in the city of Waterloo and was adopted or approved by council in 2017. The vision for the station areas was for complete communities, broad mix of uses, intensification around the asset of the ion stations. But in particular with the Northfield and Research and Technology Park station areas, some of the lands were designated as employment. Some of the station visions couldn't be implemented as far as bringing in additional uses such as residential at the time. There were lands that were identified as potential transition areas within these station areas, kind of specifying the desire in the future to consider additional uses for these areas. Since those plans came into effect, there's been changes to the regional official plan and as well as provincial policy around employment, additional uses in these employment areas. And so all this has accumulated in the recent official plan review, which Council saw on December 2nd, which created a new station area mixed-use designation for these lands. Which is kind of leading the way for this zoning amendment. In addition, as you've heard a lot about in the last few months, of course, the Housing Accelerator Fund that the city was successful in getting has a number of initiatives associated with it regarding bringing in additional housing units to the city of Waterloo. And initiative number 2 specifically deals with employment land conversion, where the ask is that the city look at former employment lands and look at bringing additional uses, specifically residential, into those areas. So this zoning amendment is also in support of that initiative. So as mentioned, Official Plan Amendment 58, which was adopted by Council on December 2nd, really laid the framework for this zoning bylaw amendment. And this created in addition to all the other changes that came into effect or were proposed at the time and were adopted by Council, there is a new station area mixed-use designation which was applied to the lands that had previously been identified as potential future transition areas. We're getting this new designation, this new station area mixed-use designation, which is intended to provide a full range of and mix of land uses, and really the intent is to provide substantial opportunities for infill development and intensification and the creation of complete communities. So with Council's adoption of this new station area mixed-use designation, subject to ministerial approval, the city is now initiating the implementing bylaw to bring these to bring this designation into the zoning bylaw and actually fully allow this change. So the zoning bylaw amendment has a few components. One is to create the actual zone. So we have a new station area mixed use zone, SAMU for short, that's being proposed to be added to the zoning bylaw. We're also proposing a general amendment to the zoning bylaw to create a new definition for live-work unit. This is a typology that the designation speaks to, and it's been one that's we're seeing increased interest in the community for this kind of typology, where beyond just like a home occupation, where it's an actual more formal place of business with residential component as well for the proprietor. So we're proposing to bring that definition into the zoning bylaw. We're also proposing to create a new site-specific zone, specifically for, site-specific exception for one property in the station area, which is 125 Northfield Drive. I'll touch on that one in more detail in a second. And then finally, the bylaw will implement the new station area mixed-use zone on various properties in both the Research Technology Park and the Northfield Ion Station areas. With a holding symbol, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on that. So the stationary mixed-use zone, these are the properties that we'll be applying it to. There are several properties that received the designation through the OP review that are not included in the city-initiated application, as there's active applications in process, so those will continue through their active applications. And we'll continue on. Any implementation of this zone would happen through those processes. But for the rest of the properties that were identified as potential transition areas, they'll be receiving this new zone. So the zone is intended to be very permissive. It provides a wide range of uses that includes employment that's compatible with sensitive uses, such as residential, bringing in residential uses, as well as services and commercial opportunities as well, really with the intent of allowing a framework to create a complete community in these areas. 30 stories is the height that was identified within the new designation that was in the OP, and so we're carrying that through into the zoning bylaw, and we're putting also a meter value in there as well, 105 meters. And that value was really determined for some flexibility based on if a building is going to be mixed use, if the podium is full of non-residential uses, those floor to ceiling heights are a little bit higher, so to allow some flexibility and to allow that to occur if someone wants to propose that, we have the 105 meter building height. We picked a density of 900 bedrooms per hectare. So with the OP review, densities have been removed from the official plan, but it still is implemented through the zoning bylaw. This is basically a proportional change where we're seeing additional stories from what was allowed in kind of our station areas before of 25 stories with a density of 750 bedrooms per hectare. So we're increasing stories to 30. We're giving a proportionate increase to about 900 bedrooms per hectare. With the small caveat that the city is going to continue to review our heights and densities in the coming year, and so these might be looked at on a zoning bylaw-wide basis in more detail in the coming year. But this is the implementation that we're going for the initial implementation of the zone. The zone also has requirements for minimum floor areas for non-residential uses. These areas being mixed use is a core component to this zone and to the designation. So we are putting minimum requirements in for non-residential to make sure that there is room for employment, there is room for commercial and community services, built right into the zoning bylaw. And then the holding provision will be placed on the properties that has the criteria for lifting baits built right into the zone. This will include things like record of site condition for any sites that might have possible contamination issues, compatibility assessment if a development is proposing sensitive uses such as residential, to make sure that there's a compatibility assessment for adjacent or nearby employment uses. Transit and pedestrian assessments, make sure that developments that are intended to take advantage of ion stations actually have good access to those ion stations, as well as master planning for larger sites and sites that are intended to develop in multiple phases. So there'll be master planning, which will deal with block planning, servicing, parkland assessment, urban design guidelines, noise studies, and things like that. So those will all be brought in through or reviewed through a holding removal. So we are adding proposing a new site specific for 125 Northfield Drive. This came out as a request from the region of Waterloo. So there's a couple of components to this. One, Forel Creek runs along the southerly property line there, so there's a desire to create an easement around that to protect that natural feature and allow for potential future enhancements. And there's also been ongoing discussions around potential pedestrian connectivity across the highway connecting to the Northfield Ion Station. Nothing's been designed or approved yet, but we wanted to have a provision in place. So if we did need to secure a pedestrian access across the site to connect to the south side of the ion station, we would have the means to do that. So that's just a site specific that we've added onto this provision. So the recommendations for Council to approve staff report IPPW 2024-044 and to approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 2414 as set out in section 7 of the staff report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Appreciate that. So, council, questions? No questions? Okay. You covered it. Okay. I do have, sorry to be the Grinch here, but I do have two. So I was curious why it says only for work-live units that they're only noted at grade level. Why is that? Like, can there not be work-live units? Like, why couldn't it be like throughout a building?
Through Mayor McCabe, so the definition was pulled from site-specific ones that we had done in the past on a one-off basis, and it was just a definition that we found had worked well. It's a fairly typical configuration where you'll have a place of employment on an active frontage or something like that, where that is the ground level. A person can easily access the place of business, and then the residential typically tends to, in this kind of topology, tends to be located above that. So that's kind of the model that we've seen before and we've had proposed before. So that's more or less what we base that definition on.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious with the way people work from home and the type of work and things like that. Like, does it need to be sort of? It feels like it's restricted that way. Then, like, is that necessary?
So, just for a bit of, I guess, additional clarity, this doesn't replace the idea of like a home occupation. So, if somebody did have want to run their office out of their place of residence, that would still be covered under a home occupation. So, the live work unit is more along the lines of someone having like a retail shop or something like that is intended to be publicly visitable, accessible, and then also have it's kind of that traditional form of like someone has a shop and then the residence above kind of thing. So that's more what this definition is going
okay.
for.
I was thinking more of like people have like kind of maker spaces, like places where they. But okay, all right, fair enough. And then I was also curious about the rationale for what's listed as primary uses versus ancillary uses. In particular, I was curious around like why would childcare not be. And what the difference is, and if that restricts it or makes it more difficult to have that use, because in childcare was one that I was particularly concerned about.
Thank you for the question, Mayor McCabe. So the distinction of what is going into the primary versus ancillary, most of that was based on what was brought into the official plan through the designation. The official plan did specify certain distinctions, and childcare and kind of some of those community uses was one. Medical clinic, I think, was another one that was in the ancillary. So in order to be consistent with the official plan, that same distinction was made into the zoning. You are correct, where their ancillary uses are a little bit more limited to the primary, where they can't exist on a site in isolation. They tend to be within a mixed-use context. And there's certain floor area restrictions based on a percentage of the total floor area. Staff's feeling is that these are still flexible enough and will still provide enough opportunities to allow these uses, and where we are being more flexible in this zone than we have been in the past. In the past, when we've had ancillary uses and complementary uses that have floor area restrictions, those are generally tied specifically to a building. Whereas with the new designation and with this zone, we're opening that up to its percentage of total building floor area across an entire site. So if there's a standalone use that makes sense to be a standalone use, as long as it's in the context of a mixed-use site that is providing some of those primary uses, it's still being permitted. And then just as an additional factor, there's no actual percentages or caps within the official plan designation. So if there are one-offs where those floor area restrictions, if someone needs to seek relief, that can be done through, for example, a minor variance. on a kind of a one-off basis if that's required.
Okay, thanks for that. Those were the only couple questions that I had through this, but, okay. So we're seeing no questions from the rest of council. Thank you very much, Tristan. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more applications, this formal public meeting is concluded, and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Freeman, are you moving it, or you have a question?
I
of
can
staff?
move it just with a comment at
Sure.
the end. Whereas council has considered all written and oral submissions, and whereas council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved that report IPPW 2024-044 be approved, that council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 2414, stationary mixed-use zone, and related amendments to zoning bylaw 2018-050 in accordance with section 7 of IPPW 2024-044. The comment I just wanted to make was with regard to land use compatibility and that and the noise and vibration reports that will have to supplement any zoning change, because there are some important employers in that district that I just don't think as a city we want to show them the door. Folks like Valley Blades are a really important employer that provide a lot of jobs, and that's a very significant industry with a lot of noise and vibration because of their stamping operations. And so so I'm hopeful that I'm not sure if we're going to do like a specific terms of reference as it relates to land use compatibility, or simply refer to the ministry's D6 guidelines, but I think we want to be thoughtful about how we lift this holding provision in this area.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Were you wanting staff to comment on that, or is it just more of a something you want them to consider going forward?
Clear. Yeah,
okay.
I think it's fairly clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So it's moved by Councillor Freeman, but if there's any other questions or comments, no. Councillor Roach, were you seconding it? Okay. Okay, so it's moved and seconded with that comment from Councillor Freeman. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Tristan and the team who worked on this. So moving on, we're at consideration of notice of motion given at a previous meeting. There are none. There are no notices of motions. There's no communications and correspondence. There is no unfinished business. Questions of council? Did I see? No, okay. Councillor Vasic. My peripheral vision's good. I thought you were Councillor Vasic.
Thanks, through you, Mayor McCabe. With the province tabling the Safer Municipalities Act, I'm mindful that this could have an impact on the city, given we do have some people living rough and some smaller encampments, and through the region we know that there are encampments throughout. So I have a couple of questions relating to this. My first, and I don't know who wants to take it, but I'm looking to understand what the city's current approach to encampments is, and how do we support people who are currently living rough?
Thank you, Councillor Vasic, and I see our Director of Municipal Enforcement Services, Nicole, coming. Welcome, Nicole.
Good afternoon. Through you, Mayor, thank you for the question, thoughtful question. Currently, our approach to encampments is to attend with regional outreach, offer supports, and provide information, and hopefully assist those in obtaining more suitable housing through their what circumstance they're currently in at that time.
Okay, thank you so much. And would you say, like, you know, when we call like housing as a human right, is there some sort of like catchy phrase that, not that we need a catchy phrase, but, you know, is there something of value or some sort of grounding phrase that captures the work that's happening? Not that there has to be, but.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not sure if there is. I think currently the approach really is, though, to provide that support to those individuals that are, precariously housed and working to find those solutions with those folks and helping them.
Okay, thanks. And I know it's early days, but I am wanting to really stay on top of this because I think it's going to have an impact in our in the region and then in the city in particular. And so, do you have any sense at this point about how or if this legislation will impact how we approach encampments or homelessness initiatives in the city?
Through you, Mayor, I would say at this point I don't. It's been tabled. The region also is currently undertaking their project to end chronic homelessness, so I think there'll be a lot of discussion in the future with this.
Councillor Basak, thanks for those questions. Are you maybe looking for an update from staff? Like the legislation was just tabled, the House isn't sitting, but like would a briefing note or an update at some point in January when staff have had time to review the legislation be helpful? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, if yes, that would be my ask. Sorry, I was just typing notes to keep updated. Yeah, if a briefing note would be appropriate at some point, I would like to. If there's some other way for us to stay on top of that, I think it's important for our council to stay on top of the changes as they come. They've come quickly. And I think a preliminary review of the legislation and a briefing note would be helpful from my perspective. Because and to stay on top of if there is a commenting period and how council will be updated about that should we wish to look at any potential advocacy as a council, as a city, or perhaps even as individual councillors.
Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, thank you. That's great. We will definitely provide information once we have more.
And I know that the clerk wants to respond, but I would just also say that certainly through the Ontario, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and then also through Ontario Big City Mayors, though I'm quite certain, give them a few more days, there'll be an update from them as well. It's just there was a lot of legislation that was tabled late last week, so a lot of information to sift through for municipalities and others. But I think it is important to keep our eye on this because it is really important, and then to have an update in public as well so that people are aware of what's happening. And I would just note that the region has the plan to end chronic homelessness that they are continuing to work towards and implement as well. And I would expect in January, I haven't seen the agenda yet, but I would expect that there's going to be an update at that, I think it's January 8th or 9th, that I would imagine that's going to be on the agenda there as well. Julie, the clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just add regarding the timing of it, part of the legislation involves regulations that are not typically drafted until after the fact. The bill is only past first reading and been referred to second reading, and there's no public consultation listed yet on the registry, but this is certainly one of the pieces of legislation that we'll be watching and monitoring.
Thank you very much. Did you have any other questions? Thanks for raising that, Councillor Basak. It is a really important one and something that we know staff do a tremendous amount of work at the city, but also at the region, and you do it with a lot of care and compassion, and we know it's difficult and challenging work, so thank you very much. Any other questions from council? Okay. Any new business from council? Okay, seeing none, I'm just going to say, oh, hold on, okay, go ahead.
I was just waiting to see if anyone else wanted to go because I've had my share of time, and so I didn't want to go first again. I wanted to thank the Cardinal Crescent neighbors who did Christmas on Cardinal Crescent. They had a light competition so you could walk around the neighborhood and look at the lights, and then you ended up at their house to have some hot chocolate, and for my kid and some of the others, some rumble time on the front lawn. So it was a great way to end a Sunday to not think about the week ahead. So thanks to them.
That's nice. And I think I saw on social media that in Alexander Park tonight, from, I don't know, 7. I'd have to check. There's a sing-along caroling if anyone wants to. I think Councillor Hanmer won't be able to go, but there's a sing-along. It is, again, really great, all the different things that neighbors and neighborhoods do to build community across the community. Any other comments on that? I would just say to whomever watches this and to everybody, council and staff, that, we wish everyone, we know there's lots of different holidays to celebrate at this time of year. It is the season of many holidays, and we certainly extend our best wishes to people who, whatever you're celebrating and with whomever you're celebrating, we know staff certainly have worked hard all year long and have performed a lot of amazing work and in projects and programs as well as core services. So we really thank them, particularly at this time of year, for their efforts on behalf of all of us in the city. So with that, enactment of bylaws, moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All in favor? That is carried. And adjournment. Moved by Councillor Bodley and seconded by Councillor Wright. All in favor? That is carried. Happy holidays, everyone. And